Welcome, everyone, to another show of the Powerhouse Podcast. I am super delighted and thrilled as I have an amazing Powerhouse leader lined up for you here today. But before we get started, let me just remind you that this really is our opportunity to have a bigger conversation around what it means to be a leader in today's environment, knowing that leadership truly is a choice. It is a choice in how you choose to show up, how you choose to serve others, and how you choose to take personal responsibility inside that space. And this is where we have the really real, really rich, courageous, connected conversations. And so with that, before I give you the formal introduction, let me say welcome and hello to my dear friend, Yvonne Heath. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Candy. Thank you so much for having me. I love your intro. It just makes me go, oh, that's so amazing.
Yay! Well, we're going to have fun. And as you know, we never know where these conversations are going to go, which is what makes them so juicy and so much fun to play in. But before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Yvonne. She is truly just a powerhouse. She is married to her best friend, Jordy, and mother of 3. She is loving life in beautiful Muskoka, Canada. So she is way up north, for those of you that realize I'm in Austin. So we are miles and miles away right now. In 27 years of nursing, she witnessed our society's death phobia and our reluctance to talk about, plan, prepare for grief causing excessive suffering. We don't have that conversation. And so we're going to get into that a little bit today. At the age of 50, she left her career and blazed a new trail, her new purpose. She is all about empowering compassionate communities and professionals to live life to the fullest, learn to grieve and support others, and have the talk about the end of life long before it arrives and help diffuse the fear. I love that. She shares her message with heart and humor and is an inspirational speaker with her book, Love Your Life to Death. As a television and radio show host through social media, she is making just massive headways and strides in really creating opportunities to have this conversation. She has also created a powerful movement called I Just Showed Up, which I can't wait for her to talk about. She is teaching people of all ages to show up for themselves and for others so they are empowered and resilient when grief arrives. And you know I love talking about how we're showing up, and I love talking about how you are empowered strong. So once again, Yvonne, welcome to the show. What an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much. We are kindred spirits, Candy, and I know that I am absolutely incapable of small talk. I can do it for about 5 seconds because having those real juicy conversations is how we become empowered, right?
It is. And you've had quite a journey, right? You've been one of those people as a caretaker in various capacities, especially in your professional career. You've been a person who's had to have very challenging conversations, and you've watched the detriment, I'll use that word, the detriment of people who are choosing not to. And I say that word very deliberately, choosing not to have that conversation. Talk about what you've seen through kind of your journey and how that brought you here to doing the work you're doing now.
I love that question because in my nursing career, I thought, what is wrong with me? Why can't I couldn't settle anywhere. And I actually was a traveling nurse for a while, and I lived in Corpus Christi, Texas. So I was that one time. Yes. I said, y'all, and I learned how to 2-step, and I saw really big belt buckles. It's impressive. But anyways, and
you probably get good at saying, bless her heart.
Oh, bless your heart, and call me ma'am.
Yeah.
How you doing, ma'am? And I asked what chicken fried chicken is, and they said, well, it's chicken fried chicken, ma'am. They couldn't understand my confusion. Yeah. Anyway, but it didn't matter where I went. What I realized, I worked in every department, obstetrics and medical, surgical, intensive care. Towards the end of my career, chemotherapy, hospice, and palliative care. But it didn't matter where I worked. We didn't talk about grief. We didn't talk about death and dying. And the truth was that not everyone dies of old age. We don't always get a warning. And so I just not only witnessed this excessive suffering by the denial, but I also felt it in my own life and in my own career. And I had grief in my life, and I didn't know how to cope with it. And I stopped finally, and I said, I looked around and I thought, I was watching people die and no one was talking about it. And I said to professionals, social workers, doctors, nurses, said, are we well prepared personally and professionally for grief, death, and dying? And everyone would say, oh God, no, we suck at it. And I said, well, who's teaching communities? Who's teaching parents and professionals and children how to grieve, how to cope with that? Because grief is a part of this journey, right? And it isn't even just about end of life, divorce, diagnosis, job loss, mental health issues. It's whatever makes your heart ache. And we don't look at it until we're in crisis. Who can think when we're in a crisis? And
so let's talk about that a little bit, because I think, people hear the word grief and there's already things that are starting to show up for them, right? And I would rather some people gather right now. People are like, oh, great, this is not a topic I want to hear today. And they're already wavering on whether they're going to jump off the show or they're going to stay with us, right? And so when I think about grief and I think about how we qualify, I guess I'll call it that, how we qualify grief, how we define grief, what makes it so critical that we're having that conversation sooner than waiting until that point of what you call crisis? Because what's happening, what tends to be the cause-effect relationship of waiting till simply when we're in crisis and we're basically shut down and things are happening to us? What makes that so critical to have that conversation up front? And when you say grief, maybe give us an even bigger definition around what that means.
So when I think of grief, and truthfully, when I used to think of grief, you think, oh, dying, death and dying, and we sort of jumped right to that. But truly, grief is whatever makes your heart ache, right? And when you think of, and people don't jump off. I promise there'll be some heavy stuff, but I'm also really funny and I'm nice. Don't run away. I promise you'll be empowered by the end. But when you think of that teenager in high school who just got dumped, they feel like their heart is broken and that they will never recover. That student at the end of college or end of high school who didn't get into the college that they really thought that would change their lives, they are devastated. That's grief. It's all grief. And the important thing and why we need to talk about plan and prepare, develop coping skills and strategies is we don't always need a professional, right? When you can't always go to a professional and maybe your heart is aching and it's 2 a.m. So you can't just call a professional. Right. We need to have coping skills and strategies and create a soft landing for ourselves and others, hence the movement, just showing up for ourselves and others, because sometimes we just need someone to acknowledge and allow our feelings and say, and people say, you're the expert, what are your words? I say, sometimes I just cry and say, this really sucks.
Right. And we talked about that. I know the last conversation we've had some opportunities to really dig into this. We've talked about that space of just showing up, right? And I think people think that there has to be some sort of script or there has to be some sort of prescribed way of, there's a couple things I'd love to dispel right now. One is I think people think that there's a certain timeline in terms of how they experience grief, how soon they're supposed to move through it. Most of us have grown up in the environments and cultures of suck it up buttercup kind of thing, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, whatever. What we don't realize though is in many of those cases, and I'd love your perspective on this, is that we're not even acknowledging the actual feelings and the emotions that are showing up. If we're classifying them as anything, we're calling them something that seems to be accepted by other people in society. Like I'm pissed off, instead of saying I'm really scared, I feel vulnerable, I feel hurt, I feel lost, because that's too wide open. And so, right. And then, then when we see someone else hurting, we think, what's the right thing to say? I'm not going to reach out. I can't do anything because I don't know what to say. And what if I screw up? And so talk a little bit about what it means to show up and why this movement was created to help dispel some of that and work through some of that. Because I think there's a big, misunderstanding or misnomer out there that says, well, I got to be X, Y, and Z. And if I'm not, then therefore hands off.
God, we're going to hug so hard when I meet you because you get it, because we are compassionate. People are compassionate and they want it, but they feel like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I'm not qualified. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to make this worse. But the truth is, and I always say, when we don't know what to do and we don't know what to say, it's awkward. Yes, it's uncomfortable. You can't fix it. And people actually in fear say to me, well, what if I make them cry? I say, well, get them a Kleenex. Well, what if I cry? Well, get yourself a Kleenex. We need to learn to allow our humanness, and that is all we need. I promise you, in 30 years of nursing, 27 as a nurse and years as a student, and the last 4 years of interviewing hundreds of people, do you know the things when I say the magic answer is just show up? Right. 3 things. Do you know who's qualified to just show up? Everyone. Because the things that made the most difference for people, the biggest difference for people, hug, text, email, call, sit silently, hold somebody's hand, cut their grass, because life carries on even when you're a hot mess and you can't cope. Your dog still wants to be walked, your kids still need to be picked up, your grass, your groceries. And you know, you don't have to take a lot of time. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. Not grand gestures. Joe, and I always say, Joe, I'm going to the grocery store. What do you need? Right. Joe, I was just shoveling off my walk. You don't need to worry about that in Austin.
I don't know. It snowed 3 times this year, but I already got snow.
Oh, that must have been awful. But you know, to go to brush off Joe's car, to shovel his walk. Joe, I'm going to walk my dog. I'm going to grab your dog as well, or I grabbed you something. I didn't know what to do or say, and I saw these beautiful flowers, and I thought of you. Right. I'm just here to hug you because I'm so sad, and I don't know what else to do, and I'm crying for you. This must be so hard. All we need is to allow our humanness and that connection. The whole fixing it thing, that's it's a small part of it. You know, we need our professionals. We need our professionals sometimes in certain crises, like 10 or 20% of the time. The rest of the time, we just need compassionate hearts.
Yeah. And I love that you talk about stepping into your humanness, and the fact that, you know, when you talk about showing up, that's the biggest thing that matters for people. And we talk about that as a leader, right? Leadership is not a title. It is how you're choosing to show up and serve people. And I know in our last conversation, you were talking about even a neighbor that was like, because I want to talk about the power of the ask. And I know that that's so important in the work that you do, especially for people to show up, because a lot of times we make the assumption, oh, I'm going to send flowers, or I'm going to send another casserole, or and what happens is when people are grieving, they've got a freaking freezer full of 20 casseroles. That is not something they need when we don't even take the pause to ask. And I remember you saying in a conversation, you know what? It was somebody saying, can you go out and clean up the dog poop? Because I can't bend over right now.
I can't do it.
Little things that we don't think about because we're so afraid of the grief that we don't put ourselves in a space to ask. And so talk a little bit about the ask.
This is the first thing I say, or many things I want to change in our society. It's
you'll need both. Let's make a list.
Few things, a lot of things. Let's forget the polite conversation, right? Hi, Candy, how are you? I'm good. How are you? I'm fine. Do you need anything? No, I don't. Let's stop thinking that. What makes us, women are notorious for this. I'm very powerful and strong, especially if we're in corporate positions or leaders. I don't want to ask for help. People are going to think I'm weak. And I love Sheryl Sandberg so much for coming out with Option B, her book, and just saying, you know, when her husband died suddenly, she was a disaster. Yeah. And she was okay to say that. Does that make her a weak leader? No, I think that makes her a stronger one, to allow your humanness and your vulnerability, but to be able to say, oh my goodness, you know what? I can't do this all by myself right now. And isn't that okay? And people do want to help. And it's actually a relief if you can ask and the person could say, yeah, actually, can you do this for me? Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes when people are grieving, they can't think and they can't process, right? So that's okay too, but start with the ask. And then you think, you know, Joe really can't think right now, but it is garbage day. Joe, I'm just going to take out your garbage, okay? I got it right here. If you know them well enough, right? Or just lead with your heart. But certainly start with the ask. Like, then that's what we were talking about. My friend she broke a vertebrae. She was on her back. She could not move. And she was the one that showed up for everyone and was so independent. And here she was. And I said, you are just going to have to accept that you've shown up for everyone and now we're showing up for you. What would be the most helpful thing I could do right now? And that she asked me, she said, my yard's a mess. And I said, oh my God, say no more, because I'm not cooking that casserole. I will rake your yard. Don't ask me to cook. That's like, ask my family. They wish. But anyways, and we can ask. And, the other thing is that if you have a tight circle of people that are grieving, and, grief is your kid going to jail, addictions, like it can be messy. But if you want to just show up, but you can't go right in that really intimate circle, just show up for the supporters, right? They have people that are just showing up for them. Maybe they're staying overnight, whatever. That means they're leaving all their stuff behind, right? Mm-hmm. And there's just, it's always better to do or say something than to do or say nothing. And it's like we need a cultural shift to say, you know what? It's better to show up and be a disaster. I did it last night. Here's a perfect example. We just opened up, a new hospice is opening up, and it's in memory of a man named Andy Potts, who was a police officer who was killed in the line. He was killed on the way to a call. And this family, of course, it was years ago. It was like in 2005. But here they're dedicating this, they're calling it Andy's house. Oh, did I just get dark? The sun must have came down. Anyways, and you know what? They just said such beautiful things, and they were doing so much for this person. And I could tell the dad was so sad and emotional. It was still hard for me to go up to him. And I just went up and I said, you know what, Bob? And I said, oh, wow, I'm going to make myself cry. And he said, well, you're going to make me cry too. And I said, then I guess we're going to cry together. I said, you are honoring your son so beautifully that I just feel so emotional right now. And is there any chance I could hug you? I felt, here, let me twist that there. I felt like I just needed to honor him and the journey that's still difficult after all these years.
But I think there's such beauty in that, right? I think the fact that, and there's so many misperceptions sometimes around, we do this work and people think sometimes because this is the work we're doing, we're out there, we're having these bigger conversations, that it means it gets easier. Actually, I find sometimes it gets more challenging because you're even expected to step into bigger spaces. And it's interesting because as I was listening to you talk about the ask piece, one of the things we talk about a lot when it's that question of, am I playing small as a leader, right? There's usually 3 questions that I have people think about. One is, who are you not serving? So it's that space of when you're not showing up, who are you not serving? The other one is, whose permission are you taking away? Because when we make that assumption, we take away someone's permission to make a request of us or show up with us or engage with us. And the piece that really resonates from what you just said is the piece around, who are we not letting shine their light? Because we don't, as leaders, don't realize, and I remember my best friend was actually the one that put this in perspective for me, because I'm one of those women that's notorious for not reaching out when I need help. I will tell everyone that the sun is shining and my business is going great, but the days I want to crawl into the fetal position, it's hard for me to ask for help. It's still to this day, it's hard for me to ask. And I'm learning more every day the power of that, because it was even my best friend who made a comment once when I had a conversation. I was like, oh, things are going really well, but man, last week I wanted to crawl in the fetal position. And I remember what she said, and she doesn't even remember this, but she was like, so how come my phone didn't ring?
There you go.
And I was like, because you're married, 3 kids, one of them's my goddaughter, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, so you get to decide how I get to be your friend. And it was like this huge sucker punch, because we don't realize, especially when we're people that are caretakers and people that are out there creating a very large scale impact, and we think we've got a way to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. What we don't realize is we're stripping people of that opportunity to have that same joy. And when she said to me, she said, how do you feel when you get to be the person that people call when they're hurting? How do you feel when you get to be the person that holds them up when they need to cry? And I'm like, and I got very emotional about it, and I'm going to right now.
Yeah.
That space of, I feel like, oh, it feels wonderful to be needed.
Yes.
I feel like there's such a gift in being able to hold that space for people. Mm-hmm. She said, so how come you don't let anyone else have that same opportunity?
There you
And
go.
I hear what you're saying in that space, and I think about how many of us, because of our own head trash going on, our own monkey mind, our own stuff, that because of that awkwardness, because of that space, we forget to step into our humanness and realize that in doing so, we actually offer some of the biggest gifts for others to join us in that space. And that sometimes it's not about how we can be there for someone else, but it's inviting someone in to be there for us. And so I think there's both sides of that, right? That we're talking about how do you approach somebody who might be going through grief, but what if you're the person going through grief yourself?
There's so much wisdom in that, and your friend it was so true, or so wise of her to say that to you, because the other piece of that, Candy, is that when we are not authentically being our hot, messy, vulnerable human selves, we are being a poor example to other people. Like, well, I'm not going to tell Candy that I'm having a hard time because she's always together. She, right? But she never has a hard time. So I'm not going to say to her that I'm having a hard time. And we do, right? We all have these facades, and we're all in our lanes, and everyone's struggling. Everyone is struggling. Like we're just trying to hold it all together and trying to do a million things. And wouldn't it be wonderful to connect, collaborate, and support each other on our hard days? Yeah. In any given room, or any given room at any given time, someone is grieving something, right? You cannot have people, and someone is celebrating their best day. Someone is being born and someone is dying. Someone is getting divorced and someone just got engaged. And they're all in the same room. So the challenge and this is why when you ask why should we talk about grief before it arrives, because we want to be able to just show up for that celebrating person, and we want to be able to just show up for the grieving person or who's having a hard time. But we also need to it can't suck the life out of us, which is what happened to me in 27 years of nursing. Yeah. I suffered along with everyone because I cared so much, but I didn't have the coping skills. I didn't have the strategies. I didn't have a soft landing, and I did not have a belief. And I believe this is the hard stuff too, about life and death, that would allow me to grieve. We all have to grieve. I'm talking about removing the excessive suffering we create by pretending that it's not going to happen in our circle, right? So to have
that pretense is damaging.
Oh my goodness, the suffering is excessive. And so I did a lot of work, and in interviewing all the people I interviewed, and that's what changed my life. I mean, I had a better perspective check-in from an 11-year-old who had a better take on life and death than most adults that I met. And so those were the things I reached out to people and said, how do you cope so well? You've been through this tremendous grief, and yet you found joy in your life again. And I asked, right? I asked and I reached out because I knew that I was suffering excessively.
Yeah. So, let's talk about that for a moment. You talk about the soft landing, and you talk about some coping strategies for yourself, because as many, especially influential leaders who are out there creating change in the world and are trying to create more influence and impact, many of them also are empathic individuals who take on, I know myself, and I have to do a lot of work to protect my energy gates and protect the fact that I can't suffer for the entire world. And I mean, even right now with what's going on, I was just having a conversation last night. Usually I'm finding myself sleeping more because there's a part of me that wants to check out and just pull my covers over the head, because to engage in it hurts my heart so much that I feel like I can't breathe. And so what are some of the ways that we create that soft landing that you talk about, so that we're not doing detriment to ourselves while we're trying to hold a space and care for others, and be that person that is trying to have empathy and be that person that's trying to support? Because there's a really fine line sometimes between being wide open and getting shut down. And so how do you manage that? How do you cope through that?
Yeah, so what my goal with Love Your Life to Death is to literally have information and resources in every modality so that whatever something different resonates with everyone. So that's why I'm going out there and speaking, and I have my book and I have an audio download that's like, I don't know, $3 US. That is my 7 takeaways, and my 7 takeaways are what I learned on how to live life to the fullest, learn to grieve and support others, and yes, have to talk about end of life so that I could live well, grieve well, and die well. And literally that's the culmination of all my learning. And if anyone here is listening, I'm happy if they want to email me, I'm happy to send them a copy of the 7 takeaways. But the 7 takeaways, the first one is the best time to talk about, plan, and prepare for grief is when we are young and healthy. And the next best time is now. So when you're in crisis, when you're grieving, it's the time to grieve, or it's the time to create space for yourself. It's not time to figure out, how am I going to navigate through this, right? So
Powerful. That's very powerful.
yes, let's figure out what does grief look like? How do I grieve? How do the people around, we all grieve differently. How do they grieve? So
yeah, I want to, just before you continue on, I want people to hear what you just said. We all grieve differently.
Oh,
I really don't think people in general get that idea. I think they think grief looks one way, it fits in a bucket and has a certain expiration date. And
absolutely.
they're supposed to move through it. If you're a person that cries, then everybody should cry. And the fact that I want that to resonate so deeply, the fact that we all grieve differently. That's so important and powerful for us to really digest and let sink in and let be more of our reality and our truth than what we've been told in the past.
You're absolutely right. It is so important. And in my book, I have several examples. One lady whose son died suddenly at age 22. A week later, she was back at the gym working out. And people were like, kind of appalled. Like, why are you, my goodness, Deb, why are you working out? And she said, I couldn't be in my house. I couldn't be still. I just needed to move. Whereas someone else might be on their couch paralyzed. Right. My husband, Jordy, you met Jordy. He's so cute, isn't he? But he's a paramedic, and he is a very compassionate person. If you ask Jordy how many times he's seen me cry, he'd say, like, do you mean this week or
today? Right. And I would be me.
Because I'm a crier. Like, I wear my heart on my sleeve. That man, I think I've heard him, or he's cried. We've been together 16 years, maybe 6 times. He cares. He has a deep compassion for people. It's just not how he expresses, grief. And that is really big learning, because even when we first got together as a healthcare professional, I'd be like watching a movie and I'm just like, disaster.
You mirror like.
Oh, he's like eating popcorn. I said, what is wrong with you? You don't have a heart. But I get it. So we all grieve very differently, and we have different things that help us through our grief. And that's why I encourage people. I mentioned we all have created a self-care toolbox, and I love my self-care toolbox. And we have 13-year-old twins. And I said, okay, so this is to remind you to take good care of yourself, which is self-care is show up for yourself first is takeaway number 4. But I said, what would make you feel better on your sad day, on a hard day, on a day you were mad? And, our self-care toolboxes look so different and are filled with totally different things. Like when Jordy's grieving or having a hard day, he's going to be out there chopping some wood. I'm going to let you know, on my saddest day or best day, chopping freaking wood is never going to be something I ever want to do. Yeah. But that's just what he needs to do, right? I'm going to be in the bath, Epsom salt and candles and crying. And, we're all very different. And we need to acknowledge and allow all of those feelings. And, the big thing about thinking that time or grief or sadness has a timeline, it really doesn't. I've had people call. So, I've been doing this grieving thing for like 6 months. I should be done soon, right? And I said, well, I'm sorry that it doesn't really work that way. But, the more you talk about it and move forward, move through your grief and action and find your your post, which is takeaway number 6. I'm kind of all over the place, but that thing that you can hang on to that can be there for you no matter what, no matter when. That's another piece of how do you cope with grief, because people depend on their pets, their family, their relationships, their jobs. These change is the only constant, right? Those things all change. You need something that you can turn to no matter what. So for some people, it's religion, a spirituality, meditation, yoga, nature. For me, it's nature. When I'm like all of this is where I just have to go into the forest. I will hug a tree.
Amen. Oh, I'm
hugging that tree
up against a tree.
Oh, and I
had people just stare at me, and I'm like, oh, if you only try
yeah,
the power of hugging, leaning my entire back against a tree.
Yes,
that's my favorite thing to do.
So me too. So my post is nature, and to stand in my yard bare feet and just, I'm like Mother Nature. I hear like the squirrels and the birds, and I feel the sun and the wind. I say, this is temporary. How awful and hard and messy I am right now, because change is the only constant. And that's the good thing about that grief that people feel. It will not, I promise, it will not always stay the same. But if you continue to feed your heart and your soul, acknowledge and allow, and move even one little step at a time in the right direction. And imagine if we could do that for ourselves and for each other. Imagine.
Well, I love that word imagine, because we play on that word a lot in Imagine in my world, because a lot of people spend so much time in what I call the what if space, and they're playing this doomsday anchoring. And even though we're talking about a very heavy subject, we're talking about grief, we play all of the worst case scenarios as we're having that conversation, instead of oftentimes we have the opportunity to shift it into an imaginative and thinking about possibility instead of all of the things that are anchoring and limiting and the trials, tribulations, and all that. There's this space of, yes, while that is going to happen, imagine if we had a different way to look at that. And so I think about imagine if, and I think about some of the work that you're doing, which I think might be a great segue to talk even about some of the movement you have going on and other things. But what is your big imagine if? As you start stepping into this work, and I've watched you even just recently more powerfully, more purposely, I wouldn't say more passionately, you're always passionate, but like just more visibly out there in this work. What's the big imagine if? Where is this moving for you?
Imagine if, no matter what our age, no matter what our health, no matter what, we lived life to the fullest, boldly, whatever was important to us, and we chose to accept that we are here as long as we're here. None of us know how long we're here, but I'm going to live my life to the fullest now, and just every day search for that unshakable happiness. Imagine if we did that. Imagine if we learned how to show up for ourselves first, because we have value and we matter regardless of age, race, sexual orientation, job, we all have value and we all matter. So imagine if everyone felt that internal value, that they mattered, and they learned how to show up for themselves first, so that they cared about themselves and didn't seek that validation and that fix me. So that we did that, so that we knew how to just show up for others. Imagine if we all understood that when someone was grieving or in a life crisis or any of life's challenges, that you knew that the greatest thing you could do were 3 words: just show up. Allow feelings, just be there. The smallest, kindest gestures make all the difference in the world. And imagine if we all chose to prepare for end of life long before it arrived, so that not if it arrives, when,
right?
We just paved the way to allow our grief, because we loved that person so much, and sometimes grief is the price of love. But we didn't have to crack codes. There was no confusion. We didn't have fractured families with different ideas, because we had all of that. We were just a society that just did end of life planning in our 20s. And we continue to update in our 30s and 40s. We just made it something that we did because it is each and every one of our responsibilities.
Yeah. And I love it. It makes me want to, and I always paraphrase because I don't say it perfectly, but one of the things Steve Jobs said, he's like, when you realize that death is inevitable, you'll start living your life
now.
And I think what you were saying fits in that so perfectly. It's like, live your life. You need to know that that is a destination. It's
Of
going.
course.
So once you acknowledge that, accept that, plan for it, then you fully can step into a space to be wide open to live your life. And I think that's so incredible. And so I know we're starting to get close on time, but before we do, I want to talk a little bit about the movement that you have going on. And we've been talking about Just Show Up, and
Yes.
I just showed up. And so what is this movement? How do people get involved with it? What's the best way for them to learn more around what they need for their own self-care and how to show up and get through this grief and everything else?
Well, thank you for that, because what we, for Love Your Life to Death, what we're creating, and I Just Showed Up, is community, somewhere for people to go, no matter what they're going through, or maybe they're lost, or they have a story to share. So we, of course, our website is loveyourlifetodeath.com, and the I Just Showed Up movement, the information is there. We have an I Just Showed Up Facebook page and a Love Your Life to Death Facebook page, and I do a weekly blog on my Love Your Life to Death. And half the time I'm a disaster, and it's just whatever I'm going through. I just talked about going to a funeral of a relative of ours who's 59, and how my heart was broken, and I talked about that, and so what I realized. So my book is something I believe the whole world should read. Love Your Life to Death, and it's about living fully and right to the end of life. And there's something in it for everyone. And I interview people ages 11 to 101.
That's awesome.
But yes, and I believe every adult should read it. But the I Just Showed Up movement, I realized children know how to just show up, and we need to empower them to just show up. Teens, adults, imagine this movement. No matter what people are going through, the answer is show up for yourself first and just show up. So we created, and I want to see 1 million of these bracelets. Let's see. So there's our I Just Showed Up.
I Just Showed Up. I love it.
Hashtag I Just Showed Up. And look at, like, we have little ones for kids because they know how to just show up. And with the bracelets comes a card. And the card says, this is to put in your wallet or wherever. It says, where's a reminder to just show up for yourself first, to just show up. And if somebody just showed up for you, give them a bracelet to say thank you.
Nice. I love it.
Imagine this movement everywhere, right? Because you know what, the greatest story I heard, and I've heard stories every day, is one lady whose her cousin's son had ended his life. It does not get much more devastating and traumatic than that. And so I knew she was busy, so I texted her and I said, I'm here. I'm so sad. And and I'm just sending you love right now. And she said to me, you know, I thought about, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. She said, because I say that with every one of my talks. And she said, and there was your voice saying, you know what to do. Just show up. And she said she had her bracelet on and she looked at it and she called her cousin. Nice. Yes, it was uncomfortable. And she didn't even know what she was going to say. And guess what? She just listened, and her cousin talked to her for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Because everyone's afraid, right? So no one else was calling. Yeah. To have this to remind you to just show up for yourself first and each other. We can, when we talk about mental health issues, addictions, whatever, we can do better together, right? It's
so beautiful. I love the idea, and there's such a piece of that when you keep talking about how children know how to show up. I personally have a theory that we start out as geniuses in so many capacities in this world, and we let our fear, we let our thoughts, these beliefs that have been handed down to us, paralyze us in some space. But if you ever watch a child around someone who's got grief, They just know, instinctively know where to tap into that compassion, where to grab someone's hand, to hug someone, just to be still with someone. And I love that they're a part of this movement, right? And so we will have all of that information for all of you in the show notes, ways that you can get a hold of Yvonne, how you can learn more about her book and the movement and everything else. And as we're closing out a very powerful discussion today, Yvonne, is there anything, like one last thing you'd love to leave this audience with? Something, a thought, something for them to remember you by, something for them to take away?
Yes. I promise you, I know these are hard conversations, but we can do better, and together as community. And in my self-care toolbox, I have a tambourine, which reminds me to that I'm in charge of making my own music, of my own skills, and of my own happiness. That is my responsibility, and to plan my life well and everything else. So my call to action to everyone, reach out. We love you. We can support you through this. But if you really want to be empowered and resilient and know how to just show up, plan your life, plan your death, and then just love your life to death. And always,
I love it.
Bring your own tambourine to the party.
I love it. Bring your own tambourine to the party, right? And I love that. I think, a big takeaway for everyone is, what does your self-care toolkit look like?
Yes.
I tell people all the time, I'm a big fan of like a Disney song or Uptown Funk or something that just, man, I can't. It lifts my soul, right? And I'm one of those that you'll find me when I'm paralyzed with the Muppet movie and a glass of wine, and I'm sitting moving right along, right? So for all of you, I want you to realize this is another opportunity for you to dig into a space to say, what do you need? What are the conversations? What are the courageous, connected conversations that are your opportunity to step forward as the leader that you were destined to be? Because as we've discussed, and as Yvonne so beautifully and powerfully demonstrated today, leadership ultimately is a choice. It's a choice in how you show up. It's a choice in how you choose to serve others, and it's a choice in how you choose to take that personal responsibility. And one of the things that I've said a million times to you, all of you listening, is you don't know who, you don't know how, and you don't know to what level you can affect, influence, or impact change for another person simply by showing up. And as Yvonne has said, it's about showing up. Show up for yourself first. Say yes to yourself first. And then be in a position to show up for others. So with that, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to my beautiful, amazing, just incredible guest, Yvonne. You are just, I so love you. You are such a kindred spirit and a soul sister. I'm so grateful that we're getting an opportunity to get to know each other better. Would love to have you come back.
Anytime, Candy.
So thank you. Sincerely.
Thank you for everything you do as well. You're amazing.
Thank you. And all of you, thank you as always for listening. Please be sure that you subscribe so that you do not miss an episode of these amazing conversations that we're having. Please go out there, say yes to yourself, really, truly show up for you so that you can show up and serve others, and know that it is your opportunity to go big, to grow bigger. So with that, I love you. I will catch all of you next time. Mwah. Take care.